All right, guys, we're going to start with some trig identities today. And we're going to look at a few that we already know. First one, if I give you guys cosecant of theta, remember we don't have that in our calculator. So in order to plug it in our calculator, we would do 1 divided by sine theta. If we had secant theta, we would plug that in our calculator as 1 divided by cosine theta. And then our last one would be cotangent of theta, which is 1 over tan theta. So those three we know. So then we can also get the other. Sine theta would then have to be 1 over cosecant. Cosine would have to be 1 over secant. And tangent would be 1 over cotangent. Okay? These are called the reciprocal identities. Okay? Now, let's look at another set of identities called quotient identities. I can't spell. Identities. All right, you get the idea. Okay, if we look at our unit circle, okay, there's our unit circle. And we have our circle, and we have an angle theta. There's our right triangle, right? If you guys remember, this is a cosine value. This is a sine value. And our radius of our unit circle is, hopefully somebody knew, 1. So if I asked you what the tangent of theta would be, tangent is opposite over adjacent. So what would we write? Sine. And then adjacent would be cosine. Okay? And then if we needed to do cotangent, remember it's just the flip of those. Cosine over sine. These are quotient identities. We're going to use these a lot to simplify these trig equations that we're going to look at. Now, if you look at this, some people get these confused. Okay? I just remember cotangent has the cosine on top. It's just how I remember. All right? So those are the first set of identities that we kind of already know. Now, these next ones we're going to use a whole lot, and they are called Pythagorean identities. Pythagorean, let me see if I can spell that again now, identities. Okay? So, let's see what we got here. We're going to use that unit circle again. There's our triangle. Cosine, sine, and 1. So, do you guys agree that's a right triangle, right? And we can make an equation using Pythagorean theorem. So our sides would be cosine squared theta plus sine squared theta is equal to 1 squared. Okay, that comes from the Pythagorean theorem over there. And what's 1 squared? 1. So there is our first Pythagorean triple that we are going to use. And yes, you have to remember that. Okay? Cosine squared plus sine squared equals 1. Now there are 2 other Pythagorean identities that we can get from that. Okay? So first one, we're going to divide everything by cosine squared. So let's start with the one we know. Okay? We're going to divide everything by cosine squared. Remember, you can do that because you're doing it to everything in the equation. What's cosine squared divided by cosine squared? 1. Sine squared over cosine squared is going to be tangent squared. And 1 over cosine squared is secant squared. So that is our second Pythagorean identity. Okay? Now, that's number 2. Now our third one we're going to get by dividing everything by sine squared. So you guys take a second. I want you to start with the original one. Cosine squared plus sine squared equals 1. Start with the original one. Divide everything through by sine squared and simplify. So take a second. All right. Hopefully that was enough seconds. Divide everything by sine squared. And simplify that. Remember the c's on top, so that's going to be cotangent squared plus 1 equals cosecant squared. There's our third Pythagorean identity. Those are the, went a little blurry there. Those are the 3 that you are going to be using to simplify. So for example, if you guys see cotangent squared plus 1, it's equal to that. So we're going to be using a lot of substitution. Okay? There's different ways that you can manipulate these equations too. For example, if you were to subtract tangent squared off of this, do you agree that it would be secant squared minus tangent squared? Okay? And if you were to subtract that tangent squared off, you end up with the 1 being there. So that's another way you can manipulate things, which you guys will see as we work some of these problems out. For example, this, we can subtract the 1. So cotangent squared would be left by itself, and then the other side would be cosecant squared. And then if you subtracted this 1 off, whoops, where am I? Subtract that 1 off both sides, you would end up with that. Which again, we'll work through some of these to simplify. So, again, these are the 3 that we will be using. Cosine squared plus sine squared equals 1. 1 plus tangent squared equals secant squared. And cotangent squared plus 1 equals cosecant squared. So those are the identities that we're going to be using to simplify. So we're going to pause, and then we're going to do some practice problems together.